Hello?
Hey people, I'm Terry Bluez and I want to welcome you to Black Gift TV. Make sure you subscribe to the channel by clicking the icon below. Black Gift TV is your one-stop shop for colored content. It is the official channel for the Four Color Man podcast and the Dean's List streaming series. You also find music, stand-up comedy, and short film works. And if you like the content, make sure you visit www.blackgiftcreative.com, the official sponsor for the Four Color Man podcast merch. Now, let's start the show.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
Okay, so let's get into that, right? That's what I really want to get into about the film is the subject matter, right? Now, I'll let you explain to the people what the story is about, or give you a pitch about it.
Well, it's interesting. So the film is about a boy who is sexually molested by his pastor, a pastor that in many ways, and I think they even say it in the film, has saved the family. I mean, he saved their marriage. He married the mother and the father. He baptized the son. He literally is like a father to these people. And they find out at some point that their son has been being abused by him for years. And what complicates it is that the son has now taken this abuse as affection. Mm. And he's now in love with this pastor because he's confused. And so he refuses to say anything against the pastor. And that's really what destroys the family, is that daddy is like, oh, you must have liked it. You know, why you ain't saying nothing? Mama's like, no, he's broken. And then, of course, he's blaming the daddy because the daddy hasn't been there for him. And so it's a family story. And then it gets into the politics of the church and this whole idea of, you know, the grandmother saying, her one line is, you know, don't put God's business in the street. I remember when I wrote that line. Don't put God's business in the street. You know, let's deal with this in-house, you know.
That's a real ass line because, you know, and that's why I wanted to get into the subject matter of it, because a lot of we talk about the intent and the messaging in the work, right? And this, you know, in this podcast, we focus on men of color and masculinity and how that intertwines with our lives, how we have to function or feel like we have to function, right? And one of those things in the Black community is, you don't be putting our business out in the street. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, we'll go through a lot of shit, and like to be molested is like, or to tell people you were molested is looked upon worse than actually having to, deal with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I even think about myself, and I don't really say this much, but I don't care about saying it, I had a babysitter, a female babysitter who touched me inappropriately. I'm going to leave it at that. And you go through life sort of sometimes confused, and, it makes you, even though it's a woman, it still also makes you question yourself, because it's like, wait a minute, that wasn't right. And that seemed weird. And then, you start acting out sexually. I mean, there's all of these things that come from that.
Yeah, man. I like in masculinity, right? That double standard, like, if an older man was touching your daughter, you gonna want to castrate this dude, right? But if your son is fucking early, you gotta look at him like, oh shit, son. Hey, you better be strapping that shit up. Like, it's a different view, right? Are we? You know what I mean?
Well, because for us, like, sex is just connected to our masculinity, right? That, because in some ways we equate being a man with having sex, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, in my mind, obviously, as men, sex is a big part of who we are. And I think just as humans, I shouldn't say as men, as humans. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes we put so much emphasis on that, and we don't understand that no matter male or female, you still need to do that when you really understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you're really getting yourself into, both emotionally and physically. And then when somebody forces that upon you before you're ready, it can mess you up, you know?
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And the thing is, most men will never say that. Most men will never talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You know
because
it's
it's painful, you know.
yeah. No, you know it's funny, man. I joke. He's like hashtag man too. Like and I'm gonna say this right, and this is a joke. Please understand this. I say like yo man, this whole thing about like believe all women. Come on, man. Believe all like bitches ain't lied before. Like Emmett Till ain't get
I'm a,
fucking
I'm
beat
a,
the.
I'm gonna just say this to you right now.
Well, hold on, let me finish. So yeah, man, you gotta take those facts and like decipher, right? Like if a man assaulted a woman, hey man, he locked that nigga up. But let's see where the facts lie. Now,
I think
if a man says he was raped, that nigga was probably raped. You know what I mean? Like that ain't no shit a nigga just gonna say. You know what I mean?
that ain't necessarily true, Terry. I mean, you know, I think, you know, I have to piggyback to what you just said. This is my thing. I don't believe you should believe all of anything. I think you need to believe the truth.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why we got into this whole notion of believe all women is because for so many years, women have not been believed. Women have been violated. They've been raped. Their voices have been just silenced because of the sort of powerful men that they either worked for or the powerful men whose spaces that they had to try to occupy in some way. And so they were even afraid to open up and say anything about what's going on with them because they felt like their jobs, their lives, their livelihood would be in jeopardy. Now, to your point, though, as a man who, as a young boy, you know, was accused of something that I didn't do, I understand what you're saying, right? We have to be very, very careful with this idea of believing all of anything because, and I mean all women, all men, all dogs, right? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is like people lie, people use a time or a moment, I should say, to manipulate the facts, to sort of, you know, manipulate a person to get what it is that they want out of a person. So you are absolutely right. I think women lie, men lie, everybody lies, you know. And I don't want to say that doesn't mean that discredits the women who are telling the truth because it shouldn't. But I also think that we are crucifying maybe some people who shouldn't be crucified. You know, I've known people who have lost jobs. I've known people who have lost opportunities, and I won't even say their names. Some of them I know who have been on shows and have done things that should have catapulted them into the next level of fame, but this was snatched away from them because of an accusation that they ended up having to fight.
Yeah. I think I know what situation you're referring to, but yeah.
And then people people don't forget. People, the only thing they remember is this person said that they did this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like
they had to fight and they had to prove their innocence and that they actually did prove their innocence. And this happens time and time and time again. And I think, you know, there has to be a balance, you know. But I do think, you know, in this era, we do need to make sure that we are not discrediting and just sort of shutting women down when they say something happened. And we need to investigate. I mean, we had a situation at, you know, the place where you and I.
Yeah. It was man. And that was such a tough thing, man.
We are caught in the middle of this situation.
Yeah, because you know both sides, and you or not know both sides, but know both parties.
Yeah,
and you know there's both sides to the story, and it's just man, it's a tough place to be in. But you can't discredit either side though. Like you know what I mean? It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, but kind of digress a little bit, but back to Wolf, right? So the subject matter, this preacher molesting this boy, and how it affects the family, and you talk about traveling with the film, and I know that you know that film got a very visceral response or very polarizing response, right? Because you traveling with it. I know you told me before, like, you know, screening it and then doing the Q&A after it, you had so many people stand up and be like, yo, this sort of happened to me. You know what I mean? Talk about like how it was touring with that film.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that you talk about that right after, talking about this Me Too movement, because I think the one thing that is similar in both is that there is shame and silence, right? Meaning that you feel that it only happened to you, and you feel that if you come out, that there will be sort of repercussions, right? And that people will then look at you as the bad party. You're putting a stain. You're trying to wreak havoc, right? And I think with this whole Me Too movement, that's what's happened, right? When one person had the boldness to come out and say, this happened to me, it then allowed for other women to feel comfortable in coming out and saying, yep, this happened to me as well. And that's the thing that I think was happening with Wolf when we were touring, is that people saw a story that resonated with them. It was their experience. It was their truth. And so it allowed for them to stand up in the theater with people that they didn't even know. I mean, it's interesting about that film because to say it out loud is difficult, but then to say it in a room of 200 other people that you don't know their intentions, you don't know them, but guess what? You just saw something that arrested you, and it didn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter what they say. You don't care because at that moment you just have to get this off of your chest. And I think that was the beauty of that film, is that it so viscerally arrested people, and at times almost paralyzed them, to the point where there were people who couldn't, after the credits roll, they couldn't move. They just had to sit there. That they had to speak out. It created such a almost like an environment of transparency that people again felt that they could say it, and that they would not be judged, and that they could no longer hold on to that trauma that had been inflicted upon them. And man, everywhere we went, I kid you not. The only place I remember where no one stood up was probably at South by Southwest. But after that, everywhere we went, every place that we screened that movie, there were at least two people in the theater who stood up and said, this happened to me. That was my story. I never saw it, painted so vividly for me, or reflected so vividly to me on screen. I've never seen anything that captured that trauma in the way that this film captured that trauma. And so I have to speak. I have to say something. I believe that film has the power. One, I believe film is power, right? I believe that film is a very powerful medium, but I believe it has the power to change and arrest people. And some people laugh when you say that. They don't believe that, but I do. Because I believe that when you see something on screen and you're in a dark space and you're watching something, film is sort of a communal experience. I think when you see something that touches you and only you, it's like church is a communal experience. You're in church, you're with other folks, right? But the pastor could say something that speaks directly to you. And even if it speaks to 50 other people, for you right there, you're not worried about them 50 other people. You're worried about what it says to you and how it resonates with you. And it makes you have some kind of reaction, regardless of if anybody else has a reaction. And so I think film has a power to do that. I think that's what Wolf was doing as we traveled and toured with the film around. I mean, we went everywhere, and it was amazing.
Yo, it's funny, right? So it's interesting you use that analogy of church, right? Because I know you're a church-going guy, and we have those discussions on religion all the time, right? But so the positive effect of those people standing up and being like, yo, this happened to me. But you also told me of a response of like the opposite end of like the church feeling this movie portrays them in a certain way. So did you receive backlash from that?
Not necessarily, man. I think it was an interesting reaction in that there were screenings where churches would come out. You know, they bought 20 tickets, or they brought their congregation. You know, those who voluntarily came. The pastor would invite them out, and then they would say things like, "This is, you know, we want to screen it at our church." But those invitations never came, and I got many of those invitations that never materialized. And I chalked it up to this idea that, you know, when you take something like that into your church, and you know what it just did in a movie theater, can you imagine what it's going to do in your church with those who have been violated? I'm not saying violated by the pastor, but just had some violation. It might not even be clergy. It could be coaches. It could be family members. It could be just whatever. I think now you have to figure out, how do you deal with that? And I say that because I'll never forget being in Baltimore, and on the front row, we were screening at the, and I'm going to say the name of the conference wrong, but it was like I think sexual abuse in the African-American community conference in Baltimore. I think that's what the conference was called. So they called and invited me to come out and screen Wolf. And obviously in that screening, right, who comes to conferences like that? People, clergy, therapists, psychologists, people who have experienced this, people who work in the community and deal with victims of sexual abuse. So the audience is full of those individuals. And I'll never forget, the film ends and, hey, anybody got questions? Somebody says anything. And then this pastor says to me on the front row, she says, what am I supposed to do now that you've shown this? If I bring this into my church, what am I supposed to do after people stand up and start to say that this happened to them? After people start admitting that maybe in my church that some clergy actually touched them in some way. What am I supposed to do? And of course, I don't know what you're supposed to do. That's not my a field, right? I'm not a clergy member. I'm not a therapist. The only thing I can say is that, one, listen and then get those people help. But then also what I can say is get the virus out. And I think that's the hard part, because sometimes the virus is the one bringing in the money. Sometimes the virus is a family member. Sometimes the virus is the one making the choir sound real good. Sometimes the virus, you know, it's sometimes those people in high places that are the ones that are doing this. And then how do you disrupt the order of your church in order to get those people out, right? My answer is you just disrupt it, because none of that matters to me.
Hello.